In the rugged wilderness of Alaska's Kenai Peninsula, where glaciers meet ancient forests and mountains touch the sky, an extraordinary tale of friendship defied the laws of nature. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 20 years ago, a young girl's compassion transformed a wounded bear cub into an unlikely companion. Their paths would cross again 2 decades later, forever changing the fate of the last great wilderness. This is the story of Maya Thompson, the girl who grew up alongside a bear, and how their reunion would spark a movement that would reshape our understanding of the bond between humans and the wild. High above the pristine waters of Kachemak Bay, perched on the edge of towering cliffs, sat the remote settlement of Havens Point. Unlike the tourist-filled coastal towns that dotted Alaska's shoreline, Havens Point remained a testament to the old way of life, where generations of families lived in harmony with the rhythms of the wilderness. The community of just over 300 souls survived through sustainable fishing, gathering wild berries and maintaining small greenhouses that provided fresh vegetables during the harsh winters. Maya Thompson was born into this world of raw beauty and untamed wilderness, the daughter of a marine biologist father and a wildlife photographer mother. Their modest cabin, with its weather-worn cedar siding and smoke curling from the stone chimney, sat at the very edge of the settlement, where civilization gave way to the vast expanse of the Kenai National Wildlife Refuge. From her earliest memories, Maya's playground was not confined to the typical swing sets and slides, but extended into the mysterious realm of towering spruce trees and hidden valleys. Unlike other children who grew up hearing cautionary tales about the dangers lurking in the wilderness, Maya was raised with a deep understanding and respect for the natural world. Her father, Dr. James Thompson, spent his days studying the complex ecosystems of Kachemak Bay, while her mother, Sarah, captured the raw beauty of Alaska's wildlife through her lens. Their dinner conversations were filled with discussions about whale migrations, the healing properties of local plants, and the delicate balance that kept their corner of the world alive. Maya's childhood was marked by an insatiable curiosity that set her apart from her peers. While other 8-year-olds huddled together during recess in the settlement's small schoolhouse, Maya could often be found at the edge of the playground, observing the behavior of ravens or collecting interesting specimens of moss and lichen. Her teacher, Mrs. Henderson, often remarked that Maya possessed an old soul, displaying a patience and understanding of the natural world that seemed beyond her years. The settlement's elders, particularly old Joseph, a Denaina elder who had lived in the area for over 8 decades, took notice of Maya's unique connection to the land. He would often invite her to join him on his morning walks, sharing ancient stories about the spirit of the wilderness and teaching her to read the subtle signs left by animals in the landscape. "The land speaks to those who listen," he would say, his weathered face creasing into a gentle smile as Maya absorbed every word. Life in Havens Point followed the natural cycle of seasons, each bringing its own rhythm and challenges. Spring meant the return of migratory birds, and the first shoots of fireweed pushing through the melting snow. Summer brought endless daylight and abundant salmon runs, when the entire community would gather to fish and preserve their catch for the winter ahead. Fall painted the landscape in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, while winter wrapped the world in a blanket of pristine white, the northern lights dancing across the star-filled sky. It was during one particularly harsh winter that Maya's life would take an extraordinary turn. The season had arrived early that year, with the first snowfall blanketing Havens Point before the last leaves had fallen from the trees. The sudden change caught many of the region's wildlife off guard, forcing them to adapt quickly to the challenging conditions. Maya's parents had noticed increased activity around the settlement as animals searched for food, leading them to warn their daughter about maintaining a safe distance from any wildlife she might encounter. One crisp morning, when the temperature had dropped well below freezing and the sun barely peeked above the horizon, Maya set out to check the greenhouse her family maintained near their cabin. The structure, built with sturdy polycarbonate panels to withstand the heavy snow load, was their lifeline during the winter months, providing fresh vegetables when the ground outside lay frozen and barren. As she made her way along the well-worn path, her boots crunching in the fresh snow, Maya heard a sound that made her stop in her tracks. It was different from the usual wilderness sounds she had grown accustomed to, not the haunting call of a great horned owl or the sharp bark of a fox. This sound was filled with pain and fear, a whimper that seemed to echo through the still morning air. Maya stood motionless, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air as she listened intently, trying to pinpoint the source of the distress call. The sound led her away from the path, past the boundary of what her parents considered safe territory. Maya knew she should turn back and get help, but something in that plaintive cry pulled at her heart. She moved carefully through the snow-laden branches, her father's lessons about tracking and movement in the wilderness guiding every step. The weak winter sun filtered through the canopy above, casting long shadows across the pristine snow. After what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only 15 minutes, Maya found the source of the cries, in a shallow depression beneath. A fallen spruce tree, partially sheltered from the snow, lay a bear cub. The sight stopped Maya's heart for a moment. Despite her familiarity with wildlife, she had never been this close to a bear before, much less a cub. The young animal was small, probably only a few months old, and its dark fur was dusted with snow. What caught Maya's attention immediately was the cub's left hind leg, which lay at an awkward angle, clearly injured. Maya's mind raced with everything she knew about bears. She knew that cubs typically stayed with their mothers for at least 2 years, learning crucial survival skills and receiving protection. The absence of a mother bear set off alarm bells in her head. Her eyes scanned the surrounding area, looking for signs of the mother or any indication of what might have happened. The snow told a story. There were tracks leading to this spot, signs of a struggle, and what appeared to be blood staining the white ground a short distance away. The gravity of the situation slowly dawned on Maya. This cub was alone, injured, and with winter setting in, its chances of survival were virtually non-existent. The responsible thing would be to leave and report the situation to the wildlife authorities. That's what all her training, all the rules, all the wisdom passed down through generations would dictate. But as she looked into the cub's eyes, filled with pain and fear, Maya felt something shift inside her. The cub let out another whimper, softer this time, as if its strength was fading. Maya made a decision that would alter the course of not only her life, but the lives of countless others, in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. Slowly, carefully, she removed her thick wool scarf, the one her grandmother had knitted for her birthday. With movements that betrayed none of the fear she felt, Maya approached the injured cub. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the whisper of wind through the trees. "I'm not going to hurt you." The cub watched her approach, too weak or too frightened to move. Maya's heart thundered in her chest as she gently wrapped the scarf around the small bear, creating a makeshift sling that she could use to carry it. The cub didn't resist, instead letting out a soft sound that seemed almost like a sigh of relief. The journey back to the settlement was slow and treacherous. Maya had to be careful not to jostle the injured cub, while also staying alert for any signs of the mother bear or other predators that might have been attracted to the scent of blood. The weight of the cub, though not substantial, grew heavier with each step through the deep snow. By the time the lights of Haven's Point came into view, Maya's arms were trembling with exhaustion. As she approached her family's cabin, Maya's mind was already racing with explanations and arguments to justify her actions. She knew bringing a wild animal home went against everything she had been taught, every rule about maintaining the boundary between human and wildlife. But something deep inside told her this was different. This was about saving a life that would otherwise be lost to the merciless Alaskan winter. The reaction from her parents was exactly what she had expected. Her father's face darkened with concern and disappointment, while her mother's sharp intake of breath spoke volumes about her anxiety. They ushered Maya inside quickly, their voices hushed but urgent as they examined the situation before them. The bear cub, now fully visible in the warm light of their cabin, looked even more pitiful than it had in the forest. Maya Elizabeth Thompson, her father began, using her full name in a way that usually signaled serious trouble. Do you have any idea how dangerous this was? That cub's mother could have been anywhere. You could have been killed. His voice cracked slightly, on the last word, betraying the fear that lay beneath his anger. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Her mother, always the more diplomatic of the two, placed a gentle hand on her husband's arm. What your father means is that we're worried about your safety and bringing a wild animal into our home. There are laws about this, Maya. Protocols, that exist for good reasons. Maya stood her ground, still cradling the injured cub. I couldn't leave it there to die, she said, her voice steady, despite the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. Look at its leg. Look at how young it is. Winter's already here, and there was blood in the snow. I think something happened to its mother. The mention of blood caused both parents to look more closely at the cub. Dr. Thompson's scientific training took over as he examined the injury from a safe distance. The leg appears to be broken, he muttered, more to himself than to the others. And you're right about its age. It's far too young to survive on its own, especially with winter setting in. Sarah Thompson moved closer, her photographer's eye taking in details that others might miss. James, she said softly, look at these marks on its fur. These aren't from a natural injury. This cub has been through something traumatic. The family stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the soft whimpering of the injured bear and the crackling of logs in the fireplace. Finally, Dr. Thompson sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. We'll need to call the wildlife authorities first thing in the morning, he said. But for tonight we'll do what we can to keep it comfortable and warm. Maya's heart leaped at these words. She knew this wasn't a permanent solution, but it was a start. As she helped her parents create a makeshift bed for the cub near the fireplace, using old blankets and towels, she felt a connection forming that she couldn't quite explain. The cub, despite its injury and fear, seemed to sense her good intentions, its dark eyes following her movements with an intelligence that spoke of something deeper than mere animal instinct. As the night settled over Haven's Point, bringing with it the deep silence that only comes with heavy snowfall, Maya sat beside the sleeping cub. She had named him Atlas, after the titan who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. Something told her that this small bear, like its namesake, would carry a burden that would reshape the world around them. What Maya couldn't know, as she drifted off to sleep beside the fireplace, was that this night would set in motion a chain of events that would span 2 decades and change not only her life, but the very relationship between humans and the wilderness they called home. The morning brought both clarity and complications. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the frost-covered windows of the Thompson cabin, Maya awoke to find Atlas watching her with alert eyes. The bear cub had made it through the night, though his injured leg remained a pressing concern. Dr. Thompson had already left at dawn to contact the wildlife authorities, leaving Maya and her mother to tend to their unusual guest. Sarah Thompson, who had spent years photographing Alaska's wildlife, approached the situation with a mix of professional interest and maternal concern. She carefully documented Atlas's condition with her camera, noting the peculiar marks on his fur that suggested human involvement in his trauma. The photos would prove invaluable later, though neither of them knew it at the time. "Maya," her mother said, reviewing the images on her camera's display. "These marks, they look like snare wounds. Someone might have been trying to trap bears in the area." The revelation sent a chill through Maya that had nothing to do with the winter morning. The idea that someone would deliberately harm these magnificent creatures struck at her very core. Before they could discuss it further, a knock at the door announced the arrival of Dr. Emily Chen, the regional wildlife veterinarian. Dr. Chen's reputation preceded her. She was known throughout the Kenai Peninsula for her dedication to treating injured wildlife and her innovative approaches to rehabilitation. The moment she saw Atlas, her expression shifted from professional curiosity to deep concern. "This is no ordinary case," Dr. Chen declared after examining the cub. "The leg injury is severe, but what worries me more are these marks. They're consistent with illegal trapping methods we've been seeing more of lately." She paused, looking directly at Maya. "You may have stumbled onto something much bigger than an injured cub." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Dr. Chen worked methodically to treat Atlas's injuries, explaining each step to an attentive Maya. The cub's leg required surgery, but rather than taking him to a distant facility, Dr. Chen made the unprecedented decision to perform the procedure in the Thompsons' cabin. "Moving him now could cause more trauma," she explained. "Besides, he seems unusually calm here." Maya stayed by Atlas's side throughout the procedure, her presence seeming to soothe the young bear even under sedation. Dr. Chen noted this with interest, occasionally glancing at the girl who showed no fear, only compassion for the injured animal. As she worked, the veterinarian shared stories of other wildlife rescues, but admitted she had never seen anything quite like this. "There's something special about this cub," Dr. Chen said as she finished bandaging Atlas's leg. "And something special about you, Maya. Not many people would have the courage or compassion to do what you did." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "I'm going to recommend something unusual. Instead of transferring him to a wildlife center, I think Atlas should stay here during his recovery." The proposal was met with mixed reactions. Maya's face lit up with joy, while her parents exchanged worried glances. Dr. Chen quickly explained her reasoning. The nearest rehabilitation facility is overwhelmed with cases right now, and this cub needs constant care. More importantly, he's bonded with Maya in a way I've rarely seen. Moving him could jeopardize his recovery. Dr. Thompson began to protest, citing regulations and safety concerns, but Dr. Chen held up her hand. I understand the risks, and I'm not suggesting we keep him indefinitely, but right now, this cub's best chance at survival is here. I'll take full responsibility and provide all the necessary documentation. Consider it a supervised wildlife rehabilitation project. The arrangement came with strict protocols. The Thompsons would need to document everything. Atlas's recovery, his behavior, his diet. Dr. Chen would visit regularly to check on his progress and adjust his treatment as needed. Most importantly, they would need to ensure Atlas maintained his wild instincts. This wasn't about turning a wild animal into a pet. It was about giving him a chance to return to his natural habitat. As the days turned into weeks, Atlas's recovery became a community project. Word spread through Havens Point about the injured bear cub, and while some residents expressed concern, many offered their support. Old Joseph, in particular, took a keen interest in the situation. He began visiting regularly, sharing ancient Denaina wisdom about bears and their sacred role in the natural world. Bears are not just animals, he told Maya one evening as they watched Atlas attempting to walk on his healing leg. They are teachers. Every interaction with them is a lesson, if we're wise enough to learn. He observed how Atlas moved, how he responded to Maya's presence and nodded thoughtfully. This one has chosen you as much as you chose him. The education Maya received during Atlas's recovery was unlike anything taught in traditional schools. She learned about bear behavior, wildlife medicine, and the complex ecosystems that supported life in the Alaskan wilderness. Dr. Chen noticed Maya's aptitude for animal care and began mentoring her, teaching her about wound management, animal nutrition, and rehabilitation techniques. Atlas's presence also sparked something unexpected in Maya's mother. Sarah Thompson's photographs of the cub's recovery process began attracting attention from wildlife magazines and conservation organizations. Her images captured not just Atlas's physical healing, but the remarkable bond forming between a young girl and a wild animal. These photos would later become powerful tools in the fight against illegal wildlife exploitation. As winter deepened, Atlas grew stronger. The small, injured cub transformed into a more robust young bear, though he remained smaller than typical for his age, likely a result of his early trauma. His leg healed well under Dr. Chen's care, though she noted he would always have a slight limp. But in some ways, she remarked, that might be a blessing. It could keep him from wandering too far too fast when it's time for his release. Maya's father, initially the most skeptical about the arrangement, found himself drawn into the unique opportunity for research. He began documenting Atlas's rehabilitation from a scientific perspective, noting behavioral patterns and adaptation strategies that challenged conventional understanding of young bears. His observations would later contribute to groundbreaking studies on wildlife rehabilitation. The most remarkable aspect of Atlas's recovery was his relationship with Maya. While he remained unmistakably wild, Dr. Chen made sure of that, he displayed an extraordinary level of trust in the young girl. Maya seemed to intuitively understand his needs, reading his body language and responding appropriately. She knew when to maintain distance and when Atlas needed companionship, always respecting the boundary between wild animal and human caretaker. During this time, Maya's own transformation was equally profound. The quiet, nature-loving child developed a deeper understanding of wildlife conservation and the challenges facing Alaska's wilderness. She began accompanying Dr. Chen on other wildlife calls, learning about different species and the various threats they faced. Her natural affinity for animal care blossomed under the veterinarian's guidance. The threat that had led to Atlas's injury remained a pressing concern. Dr. Thompson and Dr. Chen worked with wildlife authorities to investigate the illegal trapping activity in the area. Their findings revealed a disturbing pattern of wildlife exploitation that threatened not just bears, but the entire ecosystem. Maya listened to their discussions, absorbing information about conservation laws, enforcement challenges, and the complex relationships between human communities and wildlife. As spring approached, bringing with it longer days and the first signs of thawing, everyone knew Atlas's time with them was growing short. Dr. Chen began preparing both the bear and Maya for the inevitable separation. The goal was always to return him to the wild, she reminded Maya gently. His survival here means nothing if he can't survive out there. The preparation for Atlas's release became another learning opportunity. Dr. Chen taught Maya about the importance of proper rewilding techniques, how to gradually reduce human contact, encourage natural foraging behaviors, and prepare a wild animal for independent survival. Old Joseph contributed his knowledge as well, sharing traditional practices that had helped his people coexist with bears for generations. Maya approached the preparation with characteristic determination, though her heart ached at the thought of saying goodbye. She channeled her emotions into ensuring Atlas would have the best possible chance at survival. She helped create challenges that would develop his natural instincts, watching with a mixture of pride and sadness as he became more independent. The night before Atlas's planned release, Maya sat with him under the stars, her father's presence. A respectful distance away, the northern lights danced across the sky, casting an ethereal glow over the snow-covered landscape. Atlas had grown considerably, his frame now solid and strong despite his slight limp. He lay near Maya, not touching, but close enough for her to feel his warmth. "You have to be careful out there," she whispered, fighting back tears. "Stay away from humans who might want to hurt you. Remember everything we taught you about finding food and staying safe." Atlas turned his head toward her voice, his dark eyes reflecting the aurora above. In that moment, Maya felt a deep connection that transcended the ordinary boundaries between humans and wild animals. Dr. Thompson watched the scene with a newfound understanding. The past months had challenged his scientific perspective, forcing him to reconsider what was possible in the relationship between humans and wildlife. His daughter's bond with Atlas defied conventional wisdom, yet it had produced undeniable, positive results. As he observed them under the dancing lights, he realized that this experience would shape not just Maya's future, but their entire family's approach to wildlife conservation. Sarah Thompson captured the moment with her camera, though she knew no photograph could truly convey the depth of what had transpired during Atlas's rehabilitation. The images she had collected over the months told a story of healing, trust, and the remarkable capacity for connection between species. These photographs would become part of a larger narrative, one that would influence how people viewed wildlife. Rehabilitation and conservation. As the aurora continued its celestial dance, Maya made a silent promise to Atlas and to herself. This farewell wasn't an ending, but a beginning. The lessons she had learned, the connection she had formed, and the understanding she had gained would guide her future path. Though Atlas would return to the wilderness where he belonged, the impact of their time together would ripple outward, touching lives and changing perspectives in ways that would only become clear with the passage of time. The morning of Atlas's release dawned clear and crisp, the kind of spring day that held both winter's lingering chill and the promise of renewal. Dr. Chen arrived before sunrise, her truck loaded with tracking equipment and medical supplies. The plan was carefully orchestrated. They would transport Atlas to a remote area of the Kenai Wildlife Refuge, far from human settlements, but rich in natural food sources. Maya had barely slept, spending most of the night reviewing Dr. Chen's detailed notes on bear behavior and survival patterns. Her mother found her at dawn, surrounded by papers and wildlife guides, making last-minute checks of everything Atlas might need to know. Maya Thompson didn't try to offer empty comfort. Instead, she handed her daughter a small package wrapped in weathered leather. "Old Joseph brought this over last night," she explained. Maya unwrapped the bundle to find a beautifully carved wooden pendant, similar to traditional Denaina designs, but unique in its pattern. A note accompanied it, written in the elder's careful hand. "For Atlas, may it protect him as he walks between two worlds." The journey to the release site was solemn. They traveled in two vehicles, Dr. Chen's truck carrying Atlas in a specialized transport cage, followed by the Thompson family in their SUV. Maya rode with Dr. Chen, using the time to absorb final pieces of wisdom from her mentor. The veterinarian spoke not just about wildlife medicine, but about the larger picture of conservation and the delicate balance between helping animals and maintaining their wild nature. "What you've done with Atlas," Dr. Chen said as they navigated the rough terrain, "it's exceptional. But it's also a reminder of why we need to protect these animals in their natural habitat. Every bear that needs human intervention is a sign that something in the system is broken." The release site was a hidden valley that Dr. Chen had selected. After careful consideration, it offered everything a young bear would need: fresh water, abundant berry bushes that would soon bloom, natural shelter, and most importantly, distance from known poaching routes. As they unloaded the equipment, Maya noticed signs of other bears in the area: claw marks on trees, turned over rocks, and well-worn paths leading to fishing spots. The actual release was both simpler and more complex than Maya had imagined. Dr. Chen insisted that everyone but Maya maintain a significant distance. "This needs to be clean," she explained. "Too many humans will confuse him. Maya, you'll open the cage and step back immediately. No goodbyes, no lingering. He needs to choose the wild on his own." Before the release, they fitted Atlas with a specialized tracking collar, designed to expand as he grew and eventually detach naturally. The collar would provide crucial data about his movements and adaptation to wildlife, information that could help protect other bears in the future. Maya carefully secured old Joseph's pendant around Atlas's neck as well, whispering a traditional Denaina blessing the elder had taught her. The moment of release was captured by Sarah's camera in a series of powerful images: the cage door opening, Atlas's hesitant emergence, his pause as he scented the air of freedom, and finally his limping but determined walk toward the tree. "Line!" Maya stood perfectly still, her heart pounding but her exterior calm, just as Dr. Chen had taught her. She watched as Atlas paused at the forest's edge, turning back once to look at her before disappearing into the wilderness. The weeks following Atlas's release were challenging in unexpected ways. Maya threw herself into studying wildlife biology, spending hours with Dr. Chen and accompanying her on other rescue missions. Her father noticed her intense focus and arranged for her to participate in several wildlife surveys, hoping the active involvement in conservation work would help ease the transition. The tracking data from Atlas's collar provided daily updates on his progress. Dr. Chen taught Maya how to interpret the information, his movement patterns, the distances he traveled, the areas where he chose to spend time. The data showed that Atlas was adapting well, finding food sources and establishing a territory while carefully avoiding human-populated areas. 3 months after the release, Maya's mother received an unexpected call from National Geographic. Sarah's photographs of Atlas's rehabilitation and release had caught their attention, and they wanted to feature the story in an upcoming issue focused on human-wildlife relationships. The publication would become a turning point, not just for the Thompson family, but for wildlife rehabilitation practices worldwide. The article, titled "The Bear Who Came In from the Cold," sparked international interest in wildlife rehabilitation techniques. Dr. Chen found herself fielding calls from conservation organizations around the world, while Dr. Thompson's research notes became the foundation for new studies on bear behavior and human interaction. Maya's story, told through her mother's powerful images, challenged conventional wisdom about wildlife rehabilitation. But it was old Joseph's contribution to the article that captured imaginations most powerfully. His perspective on the traditional relationship between humans and bears, combined with the modern rehabilitation approach, offered a new framework for conservation. "In our stories," he was quoted saying, "bears are our teachers, showing us how to live in harmony with the natural world." What Maya and Atlas have demonstrated is that these ancient truths still hold wisdom for today's challenges. The attention brought both opportunities and complications. Wildlife officials from other regions began visiting Havens Point to learn about their rehabilitation methods. Dr. Chen established a formal internship program, with Maya as her first official student, despite her young age. The Thompson family found themselves at the center of a growing movement that emphasized compassionate conservation practices. However, not all the attention was positive. The evidence of illegal trapping that had led to Atlas's injury sparked investigations that revealed widespread poaching operations in the region. As law enforcement began cracking down on these activities, tensions rose in some of the neighboring communities where poaching had become an underground economic lifeline. Maya's father received anonymous threats warning him to mind his own business and stop supporting the investigations. Sarah's cameras captured evidence of new snares being set up, even as officials worked to remove the old ones. The situation highlighted the complex social and economic factors that contributed to wildlife exploitation. Rather than being intimidated, the Havens Point community rallied around the cause. Old Joseph organized educational programs sharing traditional knowledge about sustainable hunting and fishing practices. Dr. Thompson worked with local authorities to develop alternative economic opportunities focused on wildlife tourism and conservation. The community began to see that protecting their wildlife could provide more sustainable benefits than exploiting it. Throughout this period, Atlas's tracking data continued to tell an encouraging story. He had successfully integrated into the wild population, though he maintained a distinct pattern of avoiding areas with human activity. The slight limp from his injury didn't appear to hinder his survival. If anything, it seemed to have made him more cautious and strategic in his movements. As summer progressed into fall, Maya's daily routine evolved into a balance of regular schoolwork and intensive study of wildlife biology. Dr. Chen arranged for her to take advanced courses through a distance learning program, recognizing that Maya's practical experience with Atlas had given her insights that surpassed many adult students in the field. One autumn evening, as the family sat reviewing the latest tracking data from Atlas's collar, Dr. Thompson made an announcement that would shape the next phase of their lives. He had been offered a position heading a new wildlife research center that would be established in Havens Point, inspired by the success of Atlas's rehabilitation. The center would combine traditional ecological knowledge with modern conservation science, creating a new model for wildlife protection. The project would take years to fully realize, but it represented a transformation in how the community viewed its relationship with the surrounding wilderness. Maya's experience with Atlas had demonstrated that compassion and science could work together, that helping an individual animal could lead to protecting entire ecosystems. As winter approached again, Maya often found herself standing at the edge of the forest, looking out toward the areas where Atlas's tracking data showed he roamed. She knew she would likely never see him again, and that was exactly as it should be. His success in the wild was the greatest gift she could have hoped for, far more meaningful than any continued personal connection would have been. The first snow of the season brought unexpected news. Atlas's tracking collar showed him moving into a denning area for winter hibernation, but what caught Dr. Chen's attention was his choice of location. He had selected a den site in a remote valley that local Dena'ina people had traditionally considered sacred ground for bears. Old Joseph smiled knowingly when he heard the news. "The pendant," he said, touching the similar carving he wore around his own neck. "It carried our prayers for him to find his true path, a bear choosing that valley for his den. It hasn't happened in my lifetime. Your Atlas, he is building a bridge between the old ways and the new." That winter, as Havens Point transformed under its blanket of snow, Maya began writing her own account of her time with Atlas. Not for publication or publicity, but as a record of the lessons she had learned about courage, compassion, and the profound connections possible between humans and wildlife. Her story became part of the curriculum at the Havens Point School, teaching new generations about their role as stewards of the natural world. Dr. Chen, observing Maya's growing expertise and dedication, began to sketch out plans for a youth conservation program that would combine traditional knowledge with modern wildlife medicine. The program would eventually become a model for other communities dealing with human-wildlife conflicts, showing how understanding and respect could replace fear and exploitation. As the northern lights danced across the winter sky, Maya stood at her window, thinking about the bear sleeping in his den in the sacred valley. Atlas's journey from injured cub to wild bear had transformed not just his life, but an entire community's relationship with the wilderness. His story had sparked a movement that would continue to grow, inspiring others to see wildlife not as resources to be exploited, but as teachers helping humans rediscover their place in the natural world. The years passed like seasons in the wilderness, each one bringing new challenges and transformations to Havens Point and its inhabitants. Maya Thompson grew from a compassionate child into a determined young woman, her experiences with Atlas shaping her path in ways she never could have imagined. By her 16th birthday, she had already become an integral part of Dr. Chen's wildlife rehabilitation program, her natural abilities enhanced by years of practical experience and dedicated study. The Wildlife Research Center that Dr. Thompson had established was thriving, drawing researchers and conservationists from around the world. The facility had expanded beyond its original scope, incorporating traditional ecological knowledge with cutting-edge science to create innovative approaches to wildlife protection. Maya split her time between her regular studies and working at the center, where her unique perspective on animal rehabilitation made her insights valuable even to seasoned professionals. Sarah Thompson's photographs from Atlas's rehabilitation had sparked a global conversation about wildlife conservation. Her work now filled galleries in major cities, each image telling a story of the delicate balance between human intervention and wild freedom. The proceeds from her exhibitions funded scholarships for indigenous youth studying traditional ecological practices, creating a new generation of conservation leaders. During these years, Atlas's tracking data continued to provide valuable information about bear behavior and adaptation. His movement patterns showed remarkable intelligence in avoiding human settlements while maintaining a healthy territory. Other bears in the area seemed to follow his lead, creating what researchers called the Atlas effect, a measurable shift in bear behavior that reduced human-wildlife conflicts. On Maya's 18th birthday, old Joseph performed a traditional ceremony marking her transition to adulthood. The entire community gathered as he presented her with a carved pendant matching the one Atlas still wore, according to occasional photographs from wildlife cameras. "You walk between worlds," he told her, "just as Atlas does. This is both a gift and a responsibility." The ceremony marked another transition as well, Maya's acceptance into the University of Alaska's prestigious wildlife biology program. Dr. Chen had helped arrange a special curriculum that would allow Maya to continue her work at the Havens Point Research Center while pursuing her degree. The university recognized that her practical experience with wildlife rehabilitation was as valuable as traditional academic credentials. However, the shadow of illegal wildlife exploitation continued to loom over the region. Despite increased enforcement and community education efforts, poaching remained a persistent threat. The economic pressures that drove some people to these activities hadn't disappeared, and the international demand for wildlife products created powerful incentives for criminal behavior. One crisp autumn morning, when Maya was 19, a series of events began that would test everything she had learned about wildlife conservation and human nature. A young bear was brought to the research center, severely injured by what appeared to be the same type of illegal trap that had caught Atlas years before. The similarities were striking. Even the location where the bear was found was close to where Maya had discovered Atlas. The incident sparked something in Maya. While the research center staff focused on treating the injured bear, she began her own investigation into the patterns of poaching in the area. Using her knowledge of bear behavior, tracking skills learned from old Joseph, and data from the center's wildlife monitoring systems, she started mapping suspicious activities in the region. Her mother's photographic skills proved invaluable in documenting evidence of illegal trapping operations. Together, they spent weeks hiking through remote areas, setting up camera traps and collecting data. What they discovered was disturbing: a sophisticated network of poachers using traditional hunting grounds as cover for their operations. Dr. Thompson and Dr. Chen were initially hesitant about Maya's involvement in such dangerous work, but they recognized that her unique understanding of both wildlife and the local environment made her particularly suited for it. They insisted on proper safety protocols and coordination with law enforcement, turning Maya's investigation into a formal research project. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Atlas's tracking data, combined with the movement patterns of other bears in the region, revealed something the poachers had missed. The bears were actively avoiding certain areas, creating a map of potential poaching hotspots. Maya's analysis of this behavior pattern provided law enforcement with crucial information about where to focus their efforts. Working with wildlife officials and local indigenous leaders, Maya helped develop a new approach to anti-poaching efforts. Instead of relying solely on enforcement, they created programs to provide alternative livelihoods for community members who might be tempted by the illegal wildlife trade. Old Joseph's traditional knowledge played a crucial role, showing how sustainable hunting practices could provide for human needs while protecting wildlife populations. The project gained international attention when Maya presented her findings at a conservation conference in Vancouver. Her combination of scientific data, traditional ecological knowledge, and personal experience with wildlife rehabilitation offered a new model for addressing human-wildlife conflicts. Conservation organizations began implementing similar programs in other regions facing poaching challenges. As Maya's work gained recognition, she never forgot the original inspiration for her passion. Atlas's tracking data showed he had established a stable territory in the Sacred Valley, his presence there seeming to protect the area from human encroachment. Wildlife cameras occasionally captured images of him. Now, a massive adult bear, with a distinctive silver patch on his chest where the pendant still hung. During her university breaks, Maya would often hike to observation points near Atlas's territory, not to see him, but to monitor the ecosystem he helped maintain. She documented how his presence influenced other wildlife, creating what ecologists called a landscape of fear that kept poachers away while allowing natural processes to flourish. The research center established a long-term study of what they called the Atlas Territory, analyzing how one bear's behavior could influence an entire ecosystem. The data showed increased biodiversity in the area, as Atlas's presence created safe spaces for other species to thrive. His slight limp, far from being a disadvantage, seemed to have made him more adaptable and strategic in his movements. As Maya approached her 21st birthday, a new challenge emerged. Climate change was affecting the Kenai Peninsula, altering traditional wildlife patterns and putting pressure on bear populations. The warming temperatures were changing vegetation patterns and affecting salmon runs, forcing bears to adapt their behavior or face declining food sources. Maya threw herself into studying these changes, using Atlas's territory as a case study in wildlife adaptation. His success in maintaining a healthy territory despite environmental changes offered valuable insights into how bears could adapt to changing conditions. The research center began developing new conservation strategies based on these observations, incorporating traditional knowledge about how wildlife had adapted to past climate shifts. The university recognized Maya's work with a special fellowship, allowing her to expand her research to other areas of Alaska facing similar challenges. She traveled to remote communities, sharing her experiences and learning from local knowledge holders about their observations of changing wildlife behavior. Each visit reinforced the importance of combining scientific research with traditional ecological knowledge. During this period, Maya began writing a book about her experiences, weaving together scientific observations, traditional stories, and personal reflections on her journey from a young girl who saved a bear cub to a scientist working to protect entire ecosystems. The writing process helped her understand how profoundly Atlas had influenced not just her life, but an entire approach to wildlife conservation. Old Joseph, now in his 90s but still sharp-minded, contributed a chapter to the book about the spiritual significance of bears in Dena'ina culture. He described how Maya and Atlas's story had helped bridge the gap between traditional and modern ways of understanding wildlife, creating space for both approaches to contribute to conservation efforts. As Maya's 22nd birthday approached, she received news that would bring her work full circle. The research center's monitoring systems had detected significant changes in Atlas's movement patterns. He had begun exploring new territories, adapting to the changing climate by establishing seasonal ranges at different elevations. His behavior was teaching them about how wildlife could adapt to environmental changes while maintaining their essential, wild nature. The data sparked a new phase of research at the center, focused on understanding how individual animals like Atlas could guide conservation efforts in a changing climate. Maya's unique perspective, combining her personal history with Atlas, her scientific training, and her respect for traditional knowledge, proved invaluable in interpreting these changes and developing appropriate responses. This period of Maya's life demonstrated how personal connections could inspire broader change. Her bond with Atlas had grown beyond a simple story of rehabilitation to become a model for understanding the complex relationships between humans and wildlife. The scared young bear cub she had saved had become a teacher, showing how wisdom could flow between the wild and human worlds when approached with respect and understanding. Maya's 25th birthday arrived with an unexpected revelation. The Wildlife Research Center's sophisticated tracking systems detected an anomaly in Atlas's movement patterns that caught everyone's attention. The massive bear had begun exhibiting unusual behavior, systematically patrolling the boundaries of his territory in a way that suggested he was responding to a new threat. The timing coincided with disturbing reports of increased industrial activity in the region, proposals for new mining operations that threatened to encroach on critical wildlife habitats. Dr. Chen, now the center's senior wildlife specialist, called an emergency meeting to analyze the data. Atlas's behavior isn't just random, she explained, pointing to complex data visualizations that mapped his movements. He's actively avoiding areas where preliminary mining surveys are being conducted and other bears are following his lead. It's as if he's creating a buffer zone between the wildlife and human activity. The situation presented Maya with her greatest challenge yet. The mining companies had powerful political backing and promised economic benefits to struggling communities. Yet their environmental impact assessments seemed suspiciously optimistic, particularly regarding wildlife habitat protection. Maya realized that Atlas's tracking data could provide crucial evidence of how industrial development affected bear behavior and ecosystem health. Working with a team of researchers, Maya began compiling years of data from Atlas's territory. The results were striking. The area he protected had become a biodiversity hotspot, showing how one apex predator's presence could create a cascade of positive environmental effects. His strategic movement patterns had helped maintain crucial wildlife corridors, that allowed different species to adapt to climate change. Maya Thompson's photography played a vital role in their campaign to protect the region. Her images captured the vibrancy of the ecosystem Atlas helped maintain. Not just bears, but wolves, moose, eagles, and countless smaller species that thrived in the balanced environment. These photos, combined with Maya's scientific data and old Joseph's traditional knowledge, began telling a compelling story about the true value of undisturbed wilderness. The research center launched an innovative public education program, using virtual reality technology to let people experience Atlas's territory through his eyes. Maya worked with computer scientists to transform tracking data and wildlife camera footage into immersive experiences that showed how bears navigate their environment and make complex decisions about territory and resources. During this period, Maya received an unexpected visit from an international coalition of indigenous conservation leaders. They had heard about Havens Point's unique approach to wildlife protection and wanted to learn how traditional knowledge could be integrated with modern conservation science. Old Joseph, despite his advancing years, hosted gatherings where elders from different cultures shared their wisdom about living in harmony with wildlife. These cultural exchanges led to the development of new conservation protocols that respected both scientific data and traditional ecological knowledge. Maya found herself traveling to indigenous communities around the Arctic Circle, learning how different cultures maintained their relationships with bears and other wildlife. Each visit deepened her understanding of the connection between cultural preservation and environmental protection. The mining controversy reached a critical point when Maya discovered something extraordinary in Atlas's tracking data. The bear had begun making regular visits to ancient denning sites that contained archaeological evidence of human-bear relationships dating back thousands of years. These sites, previously unknown to researchers, provided crucial evidence for declaring the area a cultural heritage zone, adding another layer of protection against industrial development. Dr. Thompson led a team of archaeologists and anthropologists in documenting these sites, while old Joseph worked with tribal elders to record the oral histories associated with them. The project revealed a deep historical connection between humans and bears in the region, challenging modern assumptions about wildlife management and conservation. Maya's role in these discoveries led to an invitation to speak at a United Nations Forum on Indigenous Rights and Environmental Protection. Her presentation wove together scientific data, cultural knowledge, and personal experience to demonstrate how traditional wisdom could inform modern conservation efforts. The speech went viral, bringing international attention to the fight to protect Alaska's wilderness. As pressure mounted against the mining projects, Maya received a series of threatening messages warning her to back off. Rather than intimidating her, these threats strengthened her resolve. She began working with cybersecurity experts to protect the research center's data while continuing to document the importance of preserving wild spaces. The turning point came during a public hearing about the mining proposals. Maya presented evidence showing how Atlas's territory functioned as a crucial climate change adaptation zone, allowing wildlife to move between different elevations and habitats as conditions changed. The data demonstrated that disrupting these patterns could have catastrophic effects on the entire region's ecosystem. Maya Thompson's photographs of Atlas, now a massive silver-backed bear with a commanding presence, became symbols of wilderness protection. Wildlife cameras had captured images of him standing guard over salmon streams, teaching younger bears successful fishing techniques and maintaining the delicate balance of his territory. These images, combined with Maya's research, helped people understand the intelligence and complexity of bear behavior. Old Joseph contributed a powerful testimony about the spiritual and cultural significance of the land. He spoke about how Atlas's story had helped revive traditional understanding of bears as teachers and guardians of the wilderness. His words resonated with both indigenous and non-indigenous people, reminding them of humanity's deep connection to the natural world. The mining companies, faced with mounting public opposition and new evidence of the area's ecological and cultural importance, began withdrawing their proposals. This victory, however, was just the beginning. Maya recognized that protecting wilderness required ongoing vigilance and adaptation to new challenges. The research center expanded its focus to include studying how traditional ecological knowledge could help wildlife and human communities adapt to climate change. Atlas's territory became a living laboratory where scientists and indigenous knowledge holders worked together to understand how ecosystems respond to environmental stress. Maya's work attracted the attention of international conservation organizations, looking to replicate Havens Point's success in other regions. She began developing training programs that combined scientific research methods with traditional knowledge, creating a new generation of conservation leaders equipped to face modern environmental challenges. As her reputation grew, Maya never forgot the foundations of her work, the young bear cub she had saved, and the lessons he had taught her about courage, adaptation, and the importance of maintaining connections between the human and natural worlds. Atlas's continued presence in the wilderness, now as a mature and powerful guardian of his territory, reminded her that small acts of compassion could lead to transformative change. The research center's long-term studies revealed something remarkable about Atlas's influence on the local bear population. Young bears that grew up in his territory showed more adaptable behaviors and were better at avoiding human conflicts than bears from other areas. His slight limp, rather than being a disadvantage, had taught him to be more strategic and thoughtful in his movements, traits that he seemed to pass on to others. Maya's book about her experiences became required reading in university conservation programs, offering a new model for understanding human-wildlife relationships. She continued to write, documenting the ongoing story of Havens Point and its unique approach to wilderness protection. Each chapter reflected the evolving understanding of how humans could help wildlife adapt to changing conditions while maintaining their essential wild nature. As she approached her 28th birthday, Maya began planning for the future of the research center. She worked with old Joseph to develop programs that would ensure traditional knowledge continued to inform scientific research long after both of them were gone. The center established partnerships with indigenous communities around the world, creating a network of people working to protect wildlife and wild places. The legacy of Maya's childhood encounter with Atlas had grown far beyond anything she could have imagined. What began as an act of compassion for an injured bear cub had evolved into a movement that was changing how people thought about wildlife conservation. The story of the girl who grew up alongside a bear had become a parable for a new kind of relationship between humans and the natural world, one based on respect, understanding, and the recognition that wilderness had its own wisdom to teach those who were willing to learn. 20 years had passed since Maya first found Atlas in the snow. The Havens Point Research Center had grown into an internationally recognized institution, its unique approach to conservation inspiring similar projects around the world. Maya, now a leading expert in wildlife conservation and traditional ecological knowledge, found herself at a crucial turning point in both her personal journey and the center's mission. The morning that would change everything began with an urgent call from one of the center's remote monitoring stations. The sophisticated tracking systems that followed wildlife movements throughout the region had detected unusual activity in Atlas's territory. The massive bear, now in his 20th year, had begun moving in patterns that the researchers had never seen before. Dr. Chen, though semi-retired, arrived at the center within hours of receiving Maya's call. Together they analyzed the data, their concern growing as they understood what they were seeing. Atlas was methodically leading other bears away from his traditional territory, moving them higher into the mountains through ancient wildlife corridors that hadn't been actively used in decades. "It's as if he knows something we don't," Dr. Chen muttered, studying the complex web of tracking data that showed the movements of multiple bear families. Maya felt a familiar tightening in her chest. The same intuition that had led her to save Atlas all those years ago was telling her something significant was about to happen. Their answers came 3 days later when the first tremors hit the Kenai Peninsula. What started as minor earthquakes quickly escalated into a series of significant seismic events. The Geological Survey team at the research center confirmed what Atlas had somehow sensed. A major geological shift was occurring, one that would permanently alter the landscape of their region. As the crisis unfolded, Maya found herself drawing on everything she had learned over the past 2 decades. The research center became a hub for emergency response, coordinating efforts to protect both wildlife and human communities from the changing landscape. The data they had collected on wildlife movement patterns proved invaluable in predicting which areas were most at risk. Old Joseph, now approaching his 100th year, provided crucial insight into historical patterns of geological activity. The traditional stories he had preserved spoke of similar events in the distant past, describing how animals had led their human neighbors to safety. These ancient warnings, combined with modern scientific data, helped the community prepare for the changes to come. The earthquakes triggered a series of natural events that transformed the region. Landslides altered river courses, new hot springs emerged, and parts of the coastline began to shift. Through it all, Atlas continued his mysterious work, guiding bears and other wildlife to safer territories. The tracking data showed how his knowledge of the landscape, accumulated over 2 decades, was helping preserve wildlife populations that might otherwise have been devastated. Maya spent weeks in the field, documenting these unprecedented animal movements while helping coordinate rescue efforts for affected communities. Her mother, Sarah, though older now, was by her side, capturing images that would help scientists understand how wildlife adapted to rapid environmental change. These photographs would later be credited with changing public understanding of animal intelligence and adaptation. The research center's virtual reality program proved unexpectedly valuable during this period. The immersive experiences they had created based on Atlas's movements helped emergency responders understand how to navigate the changing landscape. The bear's intimate knowledge of the territory, mapped over years of observation, provided crucial information about safe routes and stable ground. As the seismic activity began to stabilize, the true scope of Atlas's influence became clear. The areas where he had led the wildlife remained largely intact, protected by geological features he had seemingly identified through some combination of instinct and experience. His slight limp, which had forced him to be more deliberate in his movements, had given him an intimate understanding of the landscape's hidden strengths and weaknesses. The international scientific community took notice of these events. Maya found herself at the center of a new debate about animal intelligence and the importance of preserving traditional ecological knowledge. Her presentations at emergency response conferences emphasized how combining indigenous wisdom with scientific observation had helped them anticipate and respond to the crisis. During this period, Maya received an unexpected message from a wildlife researcher in Siberia. They had been documenting similar behavior in brown bears there, with older bears leading their populations to new territories in response to environmental changes. The parallels with Atlas's behavior suggested a deeper pattern of animal adaptation that crossed continental boundaries. This discovery led to the establishment of the International Wildlife Adaptation Network, with Havens Point as its first research hub. Maya worked with scientists and indigenous knowledge holders from around the Arctic region to document and understand how large mammals adapted to environmental change. Atlas's story became a cornerstone of this research, demonstrating how individual animals could influence the survival strategies of entire populations. The network's first major project involved creating a comprehensive map of wildlife adaptation corridors, natural pathways that animals use to respond to environmental changes. Atlas's territory proved to be a crucial link in this network. Its complex terrain, providing routes that connected different ecosystems and allowed species to move between them as conditions changed. As the landscape continued to shift, Maya noticed something remarkable in Atlas's behavior. The bear began establishing what researchers called teaching zones, areas where he would demonstrate survival skills to younger bears. Wildlife cameras captured him showing cubs how to find food in new territories, teaching them to navigate unstable terrain and helping them adapt to the changed environment. The research center developed new protocols based on these observations, focusing on preserving not just physical habitats, but the knowledge transfer systems that allowed wildlife to adapt to change. Maya worked with old Joseph to document similarities between these animal teaching behaviors and traditional indigenous education practices, revealing parallel patterns in how knowledge was preserved and transmitted across generations. Sarah Thompson's photographs of Atlas during this period became some of her most powerful work. They showed the aging bear, his fur now streaked with silver, guiding younger animals through the transformed landscape. The images captured something profound about resilience and adaptation, showing how wisdom could be passed between generations. Even in times of dramatic change, the series of earthquakes had another unexpected effect. They revealed archaeological sites that had been hidden for centuries. Among these discoveries were ancient rock carvings depicting bears leading humans to safety during past geological events. Old Joseph recognized elements of these images from stories passed down through generations, providing new evidence of the long history of human-bear relationships in the region. Maya spent months documenting these discoveries, working with archaeologists and indigenous knowledge holders to understand their significance. The research revealed patterns of human-wildlife cooperation that stretched back thousands of years, suggesting that the relationship between people and bears had once been very different from modern assumptions about wildlife behavior. As her 30th birthday approached, Maya began to understand that Atlas's influence extended far beyond their personal connection. He had become a symbol of how individual actions could ripple outward to affect entire communities, both human and wild. His adaptation to injury had taught him resilience, his experience had given him wisdom, and his actions had helped preserve crucial knowledge about survival in a changing world. The Havens Point Research Center expanded its mission to include documenting and preserving these patterns of adaptation and knowledge transfer. Maya developed new research protocols that combined scientific observation with traditional knowledge, creating a more complete understanding of how ecosystems responded to change. The center's approach became a model for conservation projects around the world, demonstrating how respect for both scientific and traditional wisdom could lead to more effective environmental protection. 20 years after their first encounter, Maya and Atlas had helped create something unprecedented, a new way of understanding the relationship between humans and wildlife. Their story had grown from a simple tale of rescue and rehabilitation into a demonstration of how compassion, wisdom, and respect for traditional knowledge could help both human and wildlife communities adapt to a changing world. In the wake of the seismic events that had transformed the Kenai Peninsula, a new challenge emerged that would test the limits of human-wildlife cooperation. Climate scientists at Havens Point detected an unprecedented warming pattern that threatened to destabilize the delicate balance of the region's ecosystems. The change was happening faster than anyone had predicted, forcing both wildlife and human communities to adapt at an accelerating pace. Maya, now in her early 30s and directing the research center's adaptation programs, found herself facing a crisis that would require every lesson she had learned from Atlas over the past 2 decades. The bears' tracking data had become even more crucial as they worked to understand how wildlife populations were responding to the rapidly changing conditions. One morning, while reviewing the latest satellite imagery with Dr. Chen, they noticed something remarkable. Atlas, now in his 20th year and one of the oldest documented bears in the region, had begun establishing what they called climate refugia, networks of connected territories that provided wildlife with access to essential resources as traditional habitats became less viable. "He's creating a survival map," Dr. Chen observed, her voice filled with wonder as they studied the complex patterns of movement. The aging bear was systematically marking trails between high-elevation areas that would remain cool enough for denning, middle-elevation zones rich in berries and roots, and lowland regions where salmon still ran strong. More importantly, other bears were following his lead, learning to use these networks to adapt to the changing conditions. The research center launched an ambitious project to document and understand these adaptation strategies. Maya worked with a team of climatologists, wildlife biologists, and indigenous knowledge holders to map how Atlas's behavior was helping wildlife respond to environmental change. The project revealed something extraordinary. The bear had essentially created a living classroom, teaching survival skills that combined ancient instinct with innovative responses to new challenges. Maya Thompson, though now in her 70s, continued to document these remarkable behaviors through her photography. Her images captured moments of incredible tenderness and wisdom, Atlas, showing younger bears how to find food in newly accessible territories, teaching cubs to navigate unstable ground, and demonstrating efficient hunting techniques adapted to changing prey patterns. These photographs would later be credited with transforming public understanding of animal intelligence and adaptation. Old Joseph, despite his advanced age, provided crucial context for understanding Atlas's behavior. The traditional stories he had preserved spoke of times when bears had helped human communities survive similar periods of rapid change. His knowledge helped the research team recognize patterns in Atlas's behavior that might otherwise have been overlooked, revealing how ancient wisdom could inform modern survival strategies. The Havens Point Research Center expanded its virtual reality program to include simulations based on Atlas's adaptation strategies. These immersive experiences helped other conservation projects understand how wildlife could maintain crucial behaviors while adapting to environmental change. The program became a model for wildlife education centers around the world, demonstrating how technology could help humans understand and support animal adaptation. During this period, Maya made a breakthrough discovery that would change how scientists thought about wildlife intelligence. Analyzing decades of data from Atlas's tracking collar, she identified patterns suggesting that his slight limp, the result of his childhood injury, had actually contributed to his survival success. The injury had forced him to develop more sophisticated problem-solving skills, leading to adaptation strategies that proved remarkably effective in the changing environment. The international scientific community took notice of these findings. Maya was invited to present her research at a groundbreaking conference on animal intelligence and adaptation. Her presentation challenged conventional wisdom about wildlife rehabilitation, suggesting that animals could turn apparent disabilities into advantages when given the opportunity to develop alternative strategies. As summer turned to fall, the research center documented something unprecedented. Atlas had begun actively creating food caches in strategic locations along his adaptation corridors. This behavior, never before seen in wild bears, showed remarkable foresight. He was essentially establishing supply lines that would help younger bears survive, as traditional food sources became less reliable. The discovery led to a new understanding of bear intelligence and social behavior. Maya worked with cognitive scientists to develop studies that demonstrated how bears could learn and transmit complex survival strategies across generations. The research revealed that Atlas's influence extended far beyond his immediate territory, creating a cascade of adaptive behaviors that helped entire populations become more resilient. Maya Thompson's latest photo series, titled The Teacher, captured these moments of knowledge transmission. The images showed Atlas, his fur now more silver than brown, demonstrating crucial survival skills to younger bears. The wooden pendant he had worn for 20 years, though weathered, remained visible in many shots, a symbol of the connection between human compassion and wildlife resilience. The research center's work took on new urgency as the effects of climate change accelerated. Maya developed a comprehensive program that combined scientific monitoring with traditional ecological knowledge to help wildlife populations adapt. The program included creating protected corridors based on Atlas's movement patterns, establishing climate refugia in areas he had identified as stable, and preserving the food cache systems he had developed. As winter approached, the center's tracking systems detected another significant change in Atlas's behavior. The aging bear had begun spending more time in the ancient denning sites that had previously revealed archaeological evidence of human-bear relationships. Maya and her team discovered that these locations shared certain characteristics: stable geology, reliable water sources, and natural protection from extreme weather that made them ideal adaptation zones. The research center established a new protocol for identifying and protecting these critical sites. Working with indigenous communities around the Arctic, they created a network of protected areas based on both traditional knowledge and modern scientific understanding. These adaptation preserves became crucial tools for helping wildlife populations respond to environmental change. During this period, Maya received an unexpected visit from a group of wildlife rehabilitators from around the world. They had come to learn about the Atlas method, the combination of compassionate intervention and respect for wild nature that had begun with Maya's childhood decision to save an injured bear cub. The visit led to the establishment of new, international standards for wildlife rehabilitation, emphasizing the importance of preserving animals' ability to develop innovative survival strategies. Old Joseph worked with Maya to document the traditional stories that parallel Atlas's teaching behaviors. They discovered that many indigenous cultures had similar accounts of animals, showing humans how to adapt to environmental change. These stories, combined with scientific observation of Atlas's behavior, suggested that the relationship between humans and wildlife was more complex and cooperative than modern society had recognized. The research center's long-term studies revealed something remarkable about the bears that had learned from Atlas. They showed greater behavioral flexibility, better problem-solving abilities, and more sophisticated social behaviors than bears from other regions. This Atlas effect demonstrated how one animal's adaptive strategies could influence the evolution of entire populations. As Maya approached her 33rd birthday, she began to understand that Atlas's legacy would extend far beyond his own lifetime. The systems of adaptation and knowledge transfer he had developed were being passed down to new generations of bears, creating resilient populations capable of surviving in a rapidly changing world. His story had become a testament to the power of individual action to create lasting change. Maya Thompson's final photo series captured something profound about this legacy. The images showed young bears using Atlas's adaptation corridors, finding food in his caches and teaching these skills to their own cubs. The wooden pendant around Atlas's neck, visible in shot after shot, had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that compassion and wisdom could help bridge the gap between human and wild worlds. The Havens Point Research Center expanded its mission to include training the next generation of conservation leaders. Maya developed programs that combined scientific research with traditional knowledge, creating a new approach to wildlife conservation that respected both ancient wisdom and modern understanding. The center's graduates went on to establish similar programs around the world, spreading the lessons that had begun with a young girl's decision to save an injured bear cub. 20 years after their first encounter, Maya and Atlas had helped create a new paradigm for understanding the relationship between humans and wildlife. Their story demonstrated how compassion, wisdom, and respect for traditional knowledge could help both species adapt to a changing world. The pendant that connected them, Maya's around her neck and Atlas's worn smooth by 2 decades in the wild, remained a symbol of the bridges that could be built between the human and natural worlds. As winter's grip tightened around Havens Point, Maya faced an unprecedented situation. The research center's tracking systems indicated that Atlas, now in his 20th year, had begun exhibiting behavior that defied all previous observations. Instead of preparing for hibernation in his usual territory, the elderly bear was making a methodical journey through every significant location that had marked their shared history over the past 2 decades. Dr. Chen, examining the data with Maya, recognized the significance of this behavior. "He's not just moving randomly," she observed, her voice thick with emotion. "He's revisiting every major site, where you found him, where he was released, where he taught other bears to survive. It's as if he's making a final journey." The revelation struck Maya deeply. At 33, she had spent more than half her life connected to Atlas, watching him grow from an injured cub into a legendary figure who had transformed their understanding of wildlife behavior. The thought that he might be preparing for his final season filled her with both sadness and a profound sense of purpose. Maya Thompson, though now using a wheelchair, insisted on accompanying Maya to document this extraordinary journey. Mother and daughter set out into the wilderness, following Atlas's tracking signal at a respectful distance. The bear's path told a story of resilience, adaptation, and wisdom that transcended the usual boundaries between human and wild worlds. Their first stop was the clearing where Maya had found Atlas 20 years ago. The landscape had changed dramatically due to climate shifts and seismic activity, yet the elderly bear moved through it with certainty, stopping at the exact spot where their story had begun. Sarah's camera captured him investigating the area, his silver-streaked fur catching the winter light as he marked the location with particular care. "He remembers," old Joseph said when they shared the photographs with him. The elder, now over 100 years old, spoke from his bed at the research center where he had taken up permanent residence. "In our stories, the great bears are keepers of memory. They carry the knowledge of the land and pass it on when their time comes." The research team documented Atlas's journey with a combination of scientific precision and emotional investment. Each location he visited corresponded to a significant moment in their shared history. The rehabilitation site where he had learned to walk again, the streams where he had first learned to fish, the high meadows where he had later taught these skills to younger bears. At each stop, Atlas engaged in what the researchers called legacy marking, creating distinctive signs that other bears could follow. He dug food caches, marked trails, and demonstrated survival techniques that seemed specifically designed to be discovered and understood by future generations. The sophistication of these behaviors challenged everything scientists thought they knew about animal cognition. Maya noticed that Atlas was particularly focused on the climate adaptation corridors he had established over the years. He spent time reinforcing these routes, creating new markers and maintaining the network of safe passages that had helped so many animals survive the changing conditions. His movements seemed deliberate, as if he were leaving a map for those who would come after him. The international scientific community took notice of these unprecedented behaviors. Researchers from around the world arrived at Havens Point to document what they began calling the Atlas Protocol, a complex system of knowledge transfer that combined instinctual behavior with learned adaptation strategies. Maya worked tirelessly to ensure every aspect of this remarkable process was recorded and understood. Sarah's photographs of this period became her most powerful work yet. She captured Atlas teaching his final lessons, showing young bears how to read the landscape, demonstrate safe routes through unstable terrain, and locate reliable food sources in a changing environment. The images revealed an intelligence and intentionality that transformed how people thought about wildlife behavior. One particularly moving series of photographs showed Atlas interacting with a young female bear who had been born with a similar leg injury to his own. The elderly bear spent several days showing her how to adapt her movements to compensate for the disability, demonstrating the same resilience that had allowed him to thrive despite his own limitations. The Havens Point Research Center mobilized all its resources to document this extraordinary period. Maya developed new protocols for understanding and preserving the knowledge Atlas was leaving behind. The center's virtual reality program created detailed maps of his legacy markers, ensuring that future researchers could understand and protect these crucial adaptation networks. Old Joseph worked with Maya to record the traditional stories that paralleled Atlas's behavior. They discovered that many indigenous cultures had accounts of elder bears preparing their territories for future generations before their final winter. These stories, combined with the scientific documentation of Atlas's actions, suggested a deeper pattern of wildlife wisdom that bridged multiple ways of knowing. As winter deepened, Atlas's journey led him to the sacred valley where he had spent much of his adult life. The research team observed as he methodically marked important locations, created food caches, and demonstrated survival techniques to the younger bears that had gathered in the area. His actions seemed to combine practical knowledge with a deeper understanding of the landscape's spiritual significance. Maya noticed that many of Atlas's teaching locations corresponded with sites that held archaeological evidence of ancient human-bear relationships. This connection between past and present, between human knowledge and wildlife wisdom, suggested a pattern of cooperation that had existed for thousands of years. The research center began a new project to understand these historical parallels and their implications for modern conservation. Sarah's final photograph of Atlas captured a moment of extraordinary power. The elderly bear stood at the entrance to an ancient denning site, the wooden pendant still visible around his neck, as he watched a group of young bears practicing the survival skills he had taught them. The image seemed to encapsulate everything. Their 20-year journey had revealed about the capacity of wildlife to adapt, teach, and preserve crucial knowledge. The research center established the Atlas Legacy Project, dedicated to protecting and understanding the systems of knowledge transfer he had developed. Maya worked with scientists and indigenous knowledge holders to create new conservation protocols that respected both scientific observation and traditional wisdom. The project became a model for wildlife protection programs around the world. As winter settled fully over Havens Point, Atlas made his final journey to a denning site high in the Sacred Valley. The tracking data showed him entering a cave that bore ancient markings of human bear ceremonies. Maya and her team maintained their distance, respecting the dignity of this moment, while ensuring that his legacy would be preserved. The impact of Atlas's final journey extended far beyond the scientific community. His story inspired a new generation of conservation leaders who understood that protecting wildlife meant more than just preserving habitats. It meant respecting and learning from the wisdom of wild animals. The Havens Point Research Center became a hub for this new approach to conservation, training people from around the world in the principles Atlas had demonstrated. Old Joseph, in what would be his final teaching, helped Maya understand the deeper significance of Atlas's behavior. "He has shown us that wisdom flows both ways," the elder explained. "Just as humans can help wildlife adapt to change, animals can teach us how to live in harmony with the natural world. This is the gift Atlas has left for future generations." 20 years after their first encounter, Maya realized that Atlas had become more than just a remarkable individual animal. He had become a bridge between worlds, showing how compassion, resilience, and wisdom could flow between human and wild communities. His legacy would live on in the adaptation networks he had created, the knowledge he had passed down, and the new understanding he had helped forge between humans and wildlife. As spring approached, Maya continued to monitor the tracking data from Atlas's collar, though she knew this might be his final winter. The research center focused on preserving and understanding the systems of knowledge transfer he had established, ensuring that his wisdom would continue to guide both wildlife and humans in navigating an uncertain future. The wooden pendant she wore, matching the one Atlas had carried for 20 years, remained a symbol of the extraordinary journey they had shared, a journey that had helped transform humanity's relationship with the wild world. Spring arrived with an unexpected development that would shake the foundations of everything Maya and the Havens Point Research Center had worked to build. The tracking data from Atlas's collar had remained stationary for months, normal for a hibernating bear, but what emerged from his denning site challenged every assumption about wildlife behavior and adaptation. 2 young cubs, barely old enough to walk, emerged from the sacred valley cave alongside Atlas. The elderly bear, his fur now more silver than brown, moved with deliberate care as he guided these unexpected offspring through their first steps in the outside world. The discovery sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Male bears typically played no role in raising cubs, yet here was Atlas, defying conventional understanding once again. Maya, now approaching her 34th birthday, worked tirelessly to document this unprecedented behavior. The cubs showed unusual characteristics. One bore a distinctive silver patch similar to Atlas's, while the other displayed the same careful, measured movements that he had developed to compensate for his old injury. More remarkably, they seemed to inherit not just physical traits, but his complex understanding of survival strategies. Maya Thompson, though now confined to the research center due to her advancing age, coordinated a network of wildlife photographers to capture every aspect of this extraordinary development. The images they collected showed Atlas teaching his cubs with remarkable patience and sophistication, demonstrating everything from basic survival skills to complex adaptation strategies he had developed over 2 decades. "This isn't just about passing on genes," Dr. Chen observed as they reviewed the footage. "He's transmitting 20 years of accumulated wisdom about surviving in a changing world. These cubs aren't just his offspring, they're his chosen successors." The revelation prompted a complete re-evaluation of their understanding of wildlife, intelligence and knowledge transfer. The research center established the Atlas Legacy Study, a comprehensive program to document and understand this remarkable phenomenon. Scientists from diverse fields, genetics, behavioral ecology, cognitive science, and more, converged on Havens Point to study how an elderly male bear could pass on not just physical traits, but complex learned behaviors to a new generation. Old Joseph, in what would be his final months, provided crucial insight into the significance of Atlas's actions. The traditional stories he had preserved spoke of special bears who carried the wisdom of the land, passing it down through chosen successors rather than random offspring. These accounts, once dismissed as myths, now seem to offer important clues about wildlife adaptation and knowledge preservation. Maya noticed that Atlas was introducing his cubs to the network of adaptation corridors and survival sites he had established over the years, but with a new level of sophistication. He seemed to be teaching them not just how to use these resources, but how to maintain and expand them for future generations. The level of foresight and planning involved challenged fundamental assumptions about animal cognition. The international conservation community took notice as the implications of Atlas's behavior became clear. If animals could actively pass on accumulated wisdom about adapting to environmental change, it meant that wildlife populations might be more resilient than previously thought. However, it also meant that losing key individuals like Atlas could have devastating effects on their species' ability to survive. Sarah's network of photographers documented a particularly powerful moment when Atlas led his cubs to the exact spot where Maya had found him 20 years ago. The elderly bear spent several hours teaching his offspring about the area, marking important locations and demonstrating specific behaviors. The session seemed to combine practical instruction with something deeper, as if he were passing on not just survival skills, but the story of his own journey. The Havens Point Research Center expanded its virtual reality program to create an immersive experience based on Atlas's teaching methods. The program allowed researchers and students to observe and understand how he transmitted complex knowledge to his cubs, offering new insights into wildlife education and adaptation strategies. The technology became a crucial tool for conservation projects around the world. Maya worked with a team of cognitive scientists to analyze the sophisticated teaching behaviors Atlas displayed. They discovered that he was using a combination of demonstration, guided practice, and progressive challenges to help his cubs develop both physical skills and problem-solving abilities. This structured approach to knowledge transfer had never been documented in wild animals before. The cubs' development provided new insights into wildlife intelligence and adaptation. They showed an extraordinary ability to learn from Atlas's example, quickly mastering complex behaviors that had taken him years to develop. More importantly, they demonstrated the capacity to modify and improve upon his techniques, suggesting that wildlife populations could actively evolve their survival strategies across generations. As spring progressed, Atlas began introducing his cubs to other bears in the region, particularly those who had learned from him over the years. These interactions revealed a complex social network that he had established, connecting different groups and territories through shared knowledge and adaptation strategies. The research team realized they were observing not just individual learning, but the development of a genuine wildlife culture. Sarah's photographers captured remarkable scenes of cooperation between Atlas's cubs and other young bears in the area. The cubs seemed to naturally take on teaching roles, sharing the skills they had learned from their father with their peers. This multiplication effect suggested that Atlas's influence would continue to spread through the population long after his own time had passed. The research center's long-term studies revealed something extraordinary about the territories Atlas had established. The areas where he had taught survival skills showed higher biodiversity, more stable wildlife populations, and greater resilience to environmental change than surrounding regions. His 20 years of careful stewardship had created a model for how wildlife could adapt to and even thrive in changing conditions. Maya worked with indigenous knowledge holders from around the Arctic to document similar patterns in their traditional territories. They discovered that many cultures had stories about special animals who served as teachers and guardians of ecological knowledge. These accounts, combined with scientific observation of Atlas and his cubs, suggested a deeper pattern of wildlife wisdom that had evolved alongside human understanding. The Atlas Legacy Study expanded to include research on how wildlife populations preserved and transmitted crucial survival knowledge. The team documented complex systems of behavior that allowed animals to maintain and adapt traditional territories while developing new strategies for dealing with environmental challenges. This understanding led to new approaches to wildlife conservation that respected and protected these natural learning processes. As summer approached, Atlas's cubs showed increasing independence, but with a difference that set them apart from typical young bears. They maintained strong connections to their father and his teaching network, actively participating in the transmission of knowledge to other bears in the region. Their behavior suggested that they would continue and expand upon Atlas's legacy of adaptation and resilience. The impact of Atlas's story reached beyond the scientific community to inspire a new generation of conservation leaders. The Havens Point Research Center developed educational programs that combined scientific understanding with traditional ecological knowledge, training people to recognize and protect the complex systems of wildlife wisdom that Atlas had revealed. Maya realized that the wooden pendant she had given Atlas 20 years ago had become more than just a symbol of their connection. It now represented a bridge between human and wildlife wisdom, a reminder that the capacity to learn, teach, and adapt was not limited to any one species. The matching pendant she wore had become a symbol of responsibility, a commitment to protecting and understanding the deep wisdom of the natural world. 20 years after their first encounter, Maya and Atlas had helped reveal a fundamental truth about wildlife conservation. The relationship between humans and animals was not just about protection or management. It was about recognizing and preserving the sophisticated systems of knowledge that allowed all species to adapt and thrive. Their story had become a testament to the power of compassion, wisdom, and the enduring bonds that connected all living things. Summer brought an unprecedented challenge to Havens Point that would test everything Maya and Atlas had built over the past 20 years. A massive wildfire, sparked by increasingly extreme weather conditions, threatened to destroy the delicate balance they had worked so hard to maintain. The fire moved with frightening speed, consuming thousands of acres of wilderness and forcing both wildlife and human communities to face a crisis of survival. Maya, now coordinating emergency response efforts from the research center, watched in awe as Atlas once again demonstrated remarkable leadership. The tracking data showed him guiding not just his cubs, but entire groups of bears and other wildlife away from the advancing flames. His intimate knowledge of the landscape, developed over 2 decades, proved invaluable in finding safe routes. Through the chaos, Dr. Chen, working alongside Maya despite her advanced age, noticed something extraordinary in Atlas's behavior patterns. "He's not just leading them to safety," she observed, studying the complex movement data. "He's guiding them through the adaptation corridors he's established over the years, showing them how to access emergency food and water sources. He's teaching them crisis survival in real time." The Havens Point Research Center became a hub for both wildlife protection and human safety efforts. Maya's years of studying Atlas's movement patterns and survival strategies provided crucial information for emergency responders. The adaptation corridors he had established became vital evacuation routes, while his cached food sources helped sustain displaced wildlife populations. Maya Thompson, though unable to venture into the field, coordinated a network of drone operators to document the unprecedented wildlife response to the crisis. The footage revealed something remarkable: animals of different species following Atlas's lead, using his established safety routes to navigate around the fire. The elderly bear's wisdom was helping preserve not just his own kind, but entire ecological communities. The most dramatic moment came when Atlas led a group of bears, including his cubs, to a series of underground caves he had marked years earlier. These caves, part of the ancient network that held evidence of historical human-bear relationships, provided natural shelter from both fire and smoke. The research team realized that Atlas had been preparing for such emergencies all along, his careful marking of these sites part of a sophisticated disaster response strategy. Maya worked tirelessly with indigenous fire management experts who had arrived to help combat the blaze. Their traditional knowledge, combined with the wildlife movement data from Atlas's tracking system, created a new model for understanding and responding to wildfire behavior. The collaboration demonstrated how different forms of wisdom could work together to protect both human and wildlife communities. Old Joseph, speaking from his bed at the research center, shared ancient stories about how bears had helped human communities survive historical wildfires. These accounts, once considered mere legends, gained new significance as they watched Atlas guide wildlife through the crisis. The elderly bear's actions seemed to echo ancestral patterns of knowledge preserved in indigenous oral traditions. The international scientific community mobilized to study and support Havens Point's response to the crisis. Researchers were particularly interested in how Atlas's long-term preparation, his network of adaptation corridors, food caches and safety routes, had created resilience that benefited the entire ecosystem. His foresight challenged conventional understanding of wildlife intelligence and planning capabilities. Atlas's cubs demonstrated extraordinary capability during the crisis, working alongside their father to help guide younger and less experienced bears to safety. Their behavior showed that they had not just learned his survival strategies, but had developed the ability to adapt and apply them in new situations. This generational transfer of knowledge proved crucial for the survival of many animals during the fire. The Havens Point Research Center's virtual reality program became an unexpected asset during the crisis. The detailed mapping of Atlas's territory and movement patterns helped firefighters predict wildlife behavior and protect crucial habitat areas. The technology demonstrated how understanding animal wisdom could directly contribute to disaster response and ecosystem preservation. Maya noticed that many of the areas Atlas had maintained and protected over the years showed greater resistance to the fire. His regular activities, clearing certain paths, maintaining water access points, and establishing diverse food sources, had inadvertently created natural fire breaks and resilient zones. This discovery led to new insights about how wildlife activity could contribute to ecosystem stability. As the fire crisis continued, Atlas led his group to a series of high-elevation meadows he had previously marked as climate adaptation zones. These areas, naturally protected from fire by rock formations and maintained through years of wildlife activity, became crucial refuges for displaced animals. The research team observed complex social organizations emerging as different species learned to share these safe spaces. Sarah's drone footage captured remarkable scenes of cooperation between different animal groups in these refuge areas. Bears, wolves and ungulates coexisted with unprecedented tolerance, seemingly united by the common threat and guided by Atlas's calm presence. These observations challenged fundamental assumptions about wildlife behavior during crisis situations. The Havens Point Research Center established the Emergency Wildlife Adaptation Protocol based on studying Atlas's response to the fire. This comprehensive approach to disaster preparedness incorporated both scientific understanding and traditional ecological knowledge. The protocol became a model for wildlife conservation centers around the world, demonstrating how to build resilience into ecosystem management. Maya worked with international climate scientists to understand how Atlas's adaptation strategies could help wildlife populations survive increasingly frequent environmental crises. His methods of establishing interconnected safe zones, maintaining diverse food sources, and teaching adaptive behaviors to younger generations offered crucial insights for global conservation efforts. The research team documented how Atlas's teaching network continued to function even during the crisis. Young bears who had learned from him over the years began replicating his protection strategies in their own territories, creating a multiplier effect that helped more animals survive. This observation demonstrated how wildlife wisdom could spread through populations, increasing their collective resilience. As the fire gradually came under control, the full impact of Atlas's influence became clear. The areas where he had established his adaptation networks showed significantly higher survival rates for both animals and vegetation. His 20 years of careful territory management had created a resilient landscape that could withstand even extreme environmental challenges. The crisis brought unexpected attention to the Havens Point model of wildlife conservation. Organizations from around the world sent representatives to learn how the integration of animal wisdom, scientific research, and traditional knowledge had created such effective ecosystem protection. The center began developing training programs to share these insights with other communities facing similar environmental challenges. Maya realized that Atlas's legacy had grown far beyond their original connection. The elderly bear had become a teacher not just to other wildlife, but to humans struggling to understand how to live in harmony with a changing natural world. His response to the fire crisis demonstrated that wisdom could flow between species, creating new possibilities for environmental protection and restoration. 20 years after their first encounter, Maya and Atlas had helped reveal something profound about the relationship between humans and wildlife. The fire crisis showed that survival depended not on dominance or control, but on recognizing and preserving the sophisticated knowledge systems that existed in both human and animal communities. Their story had become a testament to the power of mutual respect, shared wisdom, and the enduring bonds that connected all living things in times of crisis. In the aftermath of the Great Fire, as autumn painted the surviving landscape in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Maya received news that would transform their understanding of wildlife intelligence forever. The research center's advanced tracking systems had detected an extraordinary pattern of behavior, not just from Atlas, but from bears across the entire region. They were systematically restoring the burned areas, spreading seeds through their movements, and establishing new adaptation corridors through the changed landscape. At the forefront of this restoration effort was Atlas, now showing signs of his advanced age, but moving with purposeful determination. His tracking data revealed that he was teaching his cubs and other bears how to rebuild the ecosystem, demonstrating sophisticated techniques for encouraging new growth and establishing sustainable food sources in the fire-affected areas. Dr. Chen, analyzing the data with Maya, made a stunning discovery. "Look at these movement patterns," she said, pointing to complex visualizations on the research center's main screen. "They're not random. Atlas is orchestrating a coordinated effort to heal the landscape. He's applying everything he's learned over the past 20 years about adaptation and survival, but on a scale we've never seen before." The Havens Point Research Center mobilized its resources to document this unprecedented wildlife-led restoration effort. Maya Thompson, though now confined to a wheelchair, directed a team of photographers and drone operators to capture the remarkable process. The images they collected showed bears working in patterns that mimicked traditional ecological restoration techniques, suggesting a deep understanding of ecosystem recovery. Maya noticed that Atlas had begun incorporating the burned areas into his teaching network, using the recovery process as a way to demonstrate adaptive behaviors to younger bears. His cubs, now showing remarkable independence, took active roles in this education effort, spreading their father's wisdom to other young bears in the region. This multiplication of knowledge challenged everything scientists thought they knew about wildlife intelligence and social learning. Old Joseph, in what would be his final contribution to the research center, shared ancient stories about how bears had helped restore the land after historical fires. These traditional accounts describe bears as healers of the forest, capable of understanding and nurturing the delicate balance of nature. The parallel between these stories and Atlas's current behavior suggested a deeper pattern of ecological wisdom preserved across generations. The international scientific community was stunned by the sophistication of the wildlife-led restoration effort. Researchers documented how the bear's activities, from seed dispersal to soil turnover, were accelerating the ecosystem's recovery. Atlas's methods demonstrated an understanding of ecological succession that rivaled human restoration science, while adding innovative approaches that humans hadn't considered. Maya worked with climate scientists to understand how Atlas's restoration techniques could inform human efforts to adapt to environmental change. His methods of establishing interconnected recovery zones, maintaining biodiversity through strategic movement patterns, and teaching adaptive behaviors to younger generations, offered crucial insights for ecosystem management in an era of increasing environmental challenges. The research center's virtual reality program was updated to include detailed simulations of the restoration process, allowing scientists and students around the world to study Atlas's techniques. The technology revealed subtle patterns in the bear's behavior that might otherwise have been missed, showing how their instinctive actions combined with learned wisdom to promote ecosystem recovery. Sarah's photography team captured a particularly powerful moment when Atlas led his cubs to a severely burned area that had been special to Maya, the place where she had first found him 20 years ago. The elderly bear spent several days working with his offspring to restore this location, demonstrating specific techniques for encouraging new growth and establishing water retention patterns that would support recovery. The Havens Point Research Center established the wildlife-led ecosystem restoration project, dedicated to understanding and supporting the natural recovery processes Atlas had initiated. The project combined scientific observation with traditional ecological knowledge, creating a new model for ecosystem restoration that recognized and worked with wildlife intelligence rather than trying to control it. Maya noticed that many of the areas Atlas chose for restoration corresponded with sites that held cultural significance for indigenous peoples. This connection between wildlife wisdom and traditional human knowledge suggested a deeper pattern of ecological understanding that transcended species boundaries. The research team began working with indigenous knowledge holders to explore these parallels and their implications for conservation. Atlas's cubs demonstrated an extraordinary ability to adapt and improve upon their father's restoration techniques. They developed new methods for dealing with specific challenges posed by the changed landscape, showing that wildlife wisdom could evolve and respond to novel situations. Their innovations suggested that animal intelligence was more dynamic and creative than previously recognized. The impact of the restoration effort extended far beyond the immediate region. Conservation organizations from around the world sent representatives to study how wildlife-led recovery could be supported and encouraged in other fire-affected areas. The Havens Point model became a template for a new approach to ecosystem restoration that respected and worked with natural intelligence. Maya worked with international researchers to document how Atlas's restoration techniques were spreading through bear populations across the region. Young bears who learned from him and his cubs began applying these methods in their own territories, creating a network of recovery zones that helped stabilize the entire ecosystem. This observation demonstrated how wildlife wisdom could adapt and spread to address large-scale environmental challenges. The research team was particularly interested in how Atlas used his understanding of climate adaptation to guide the restoration process. His methods seemed specifically designed to create resilient ecosystems capable of withstanding future environmental changes. This foresight suggested a level of ecological understanding that challenged conventional views of animal intelligence. Sarah's final photo series captured the transformation of the burned landscape under Atlas's influence. The images showed how areas where bears had been active recovered more quickly and developed greater biodiversity than areas left to natural processes alone. These photographs provided powerful evidence of how wildlife wisdom could accelerate ecosystem healing. The Havens Point Research Center expanded its training programs to include courses on supporting wildlife-led restoration efforts. These programs combined scientific understanding with traditional ecological knowledge, teaching conservation professionals how to recognize and work with the natural intelligence of wildlife populations. The approach became a model for ecosystem recovery projects around the world. Maya realized that Atlas's response to the fire had revealed something profound about the relationship between humans and wildlife. His sophisticated restoration efforts demonstrated that animals were not just passive inhabitants of ecosystems, but active participants in their maintenance and recovery. This understanding challenged humans to reconsider their role in environmental protection and restoration. 20 years after their first encounter, Maya and Atlas had helped pioneer a new approach to conservation that recognized and worked with wildlife intelligence. The fire recovery effort showed that animals possessed sophisticated ecological knowledge that could complement and enhance human efforts to protect and restore natural systems. Their story had become a testament to the power of partnership between species in facing environmental challenges. As winter approached, Maya noticed a new pattern in Atlas's behavior. The elderly bear began establishing what researchers called knowledge repositories, specific locations where he demonstrated and preserved crucial survival and restoration techniques. These sites became living classrooms where young bears could learn the accumulated wisdom of generations, ensuring that crucial ecological knowledge would survive even as individuals passed on. The research center documented how these knowledge repositories functioned as part of a larger system of wildlife education and adaptation. Atlas's methods of preserving and transmitting ecological wisdom offered new insights into how animal populations maintained and evolved their understanding of environmental relationships. This discovery suggested that wildlife conservation needed to protect not just individual animals and habitats, but the sophisticated knowledge systems they had developed. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.